Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about the Neolithic Revolution. So we have this period called the Paleolithic Age, where the Earth is very fertile and where human beings are living as hunter-gatherers. And then it seems as though that starts to change. There are a couple of theories about why the Neolithic Revolution happens, why human beings make this transition from living as hunter-gatherers to living as farmers, and from being a nomadic, migratory species to being a species that lives in a particular place, that associates its identity with a particular place. Some people have said that eventually the rate of warming and the fertility of the earth starts to slow down. And this means that the food supply is no longer sufficient to support human beings that live this way. And we have further evidence that supports this with the extinction of many megafauna like mammoths at this point. These large animals can also no longer find the readily available rich food supply that had characterized the Paleolithic period. And so the human population is still growing, the food supply is less, and so human beings have to problem solve how to find their food supply. And so we start to see that groups are recognizing the possibilities for taking advantage of the reproductive cycles of the world that they see around them. And so first of all, we see them start to live near oceans and take up fishing as a way to provide them with the food they need. And we see how they start to form camps, and they'll remain with these camps while they're waiting for the food in a particular place to become ripe enough for them to harvest, and then they'll move again. So what's significant here is that this Neolithic revolution, a revolution suggests something that's very sudden and sometimes very violent. But the Neolithic revolution is something that's gradual. And so this is the type of nuance that we don't have time to get into when we're taking a Western Civ 1 course or another Gen Ed course, for example. But the significance is that the Neolithic revolution takes time. It begins with these semi-permanent settlements, and then the settlements gradually become more permanent. And it changes the way that human beings live. They become a lot more self-conscious about how they interact with nature. They start to see themselves as stewards of nature, and as with the responsibility to take advantage of the natural cycles in the world that they see around them, to promote growth in the world and in the climate that they are living in. Now you're going to want to move to the next slide if you're following along in the PowerPoint. So we're going to talk about some examples of early Neolithic settlements that we find in the ancient Mediterranean. First one we're going to look at is really cool. It's called Göbekli Tepe. It's located in southern Anatolia. Anatolia is the name in the ancient world for modern-day Turkey. So forever afterwards in this class, when I mention Anatolia, it means I'm referring to modern-day Turkey. So Göbekli Tepe is found in southern Anatolia, and it's a site that dates from anywhere between 9,000 and 12,000 years ago. We use radiocarbon dating. That becomes inconsistent after about 10,000 years. So it's difficult to predict exactly when the site at Göbekli Tepe was built. But it is definitely one of, if not the oldest archaeological site in the world. What does this site look like? It's really interesting. It's made up of about 200 pillars, huge pillars, about 20 meters, so that's about 60 feet high, that weigh about 20 tons and are shaped like a capital uppercase letter T. And these pillars are organized into 20 circles from 10 to 20 meters in diameter, and they're decorated with animal motifs. So think how bizarre this would have been to discover when it was discovered in the 19th century. Then think about what would have gone into creating this. How are primitive human beings able to construct stone fortifications is the wrong word, stone structures that are so huge and so heavy, and then to carve the images of animals on them. Some of these carvings are really beautiful, really precise. You'll see that in some of the videos that I provided for you today. They would have taken a long time to construct. They would have taken expertise. And so this expertise, the technological ability to create a site like this, must already have existed. And so where did that come from? How was that learned? What else do we know about the site? We see stone benches, and we find the remains of food remains and meat remains, so deer and geese. So that suggests that people are feasting at this site. But what's really interesting is that there is no sign of permanent habitation. So there's no evidence that human beings lived here for a long time. They came here, they feasted here, but we have no evidence that they did anything beyond that. And so what is this site being used for? Strange, massive stone structures, remains of feasting. The History Channel goes straight to aliens, as the History Channel does. It says this must have been constructed by aliens. The History Channel is drawn to aliens like moths to a flame. And it says something about the History Channel. It says something not very great about the History Channel, that their reaction is to say this was created by aliens. And so that's obviously a cop-out. That's not what you're supposed to do as historians. When your preconceptions are challenged, in this case, your preconceptions that primitive human beings were not that brilliant, you have to be willing to adjust those preconceptions. So we need to take a step back, think about what these human beings, who these human beings were, who were able to create a site like this. They might have been primitive in some ways, but they were clearly good at something. And we think, so what was this site used for? The consensus is that this site was a ceremonial site. It was used for religious practices. Here's what we think happened here. There were sacrifices made to the gods here. Human beings came to these sacrifices. They feasted after these sacrifices, after these ceremonial rituals had taken place, and then they went back to their homes. But this is the beginnings of what we associate with the Neolithic Revolution, and that is, it's the beginnings of human beings starting to live starting to congregate in particular places, to associate specific meaning with particular places. You don't go anywhere to carry out these rituals. This, for some reason, to these people was a special place. And so they come to this place, they start to build, eventually over time, they're going to start to build settlements around these places where they pray and where they worship. And so this offers us a really critical insight into the people that forged the Neolithic Revolution. That these people were fundamentally religious, and that religion is actually one of the driving factors of the Neolithic Revolution. That's something that's very counterintuitive to modern students of history. That's because we tend to shy away from thinking of religion as a driver of historical change. Typically, we tend to say, the Neolithic Revolution, no, it was driven by climate change, it was driven by these various social constructs. And then after the Neolithic Revolution had taken place, human beings who became powerful in this society constructed religion without really believing in these gods as a way to control people. But what we see in this ancient society, when we look at it more closely, is that religion predated the Neolithic Revolution, and religious practices drove the Neolithic Revolution. Sites like Göbekli Tepe drove humans to develop permanent sites, to learn how to become farmers and to conduct this Neolithic Revolution. And these religions were based on ideas and beliefs that people genuinely believed. And so it's the religion that comes first, and it's the societies that come afterwards. So this is an important way to understand one of the contributing factors to the Neolithic Revolution. I'm not saying that religion is the only factor that caused the Neolithic Revolution. Changes in climate, changes in population, undoubtedly drivers as well, but it's easy to forget, in my experience, the religious component. And when we look at the archaeological evidence, it's actually very important. We're going to talk more about early Neolithic sites in the next video.